You're listening to The Big Album Show with Paul Dillon and Dan O'Neill.
Hello and welcome to the Big Album Show with me, Paul Dillon.
And me, Dan O'Neill.
We're the show that brings you the big albums that define the bands that made them and the times they were made in. The big albums that keep listeners coming back time and time again. And our album tonight, Dan, is
To the Faithful Departed by the Cranberries.
The Pride of Limerick, Dan.
Absolutely. Like as listeners might know, I live here in Limerick, County Limerick. And funny enough, I actually live in a small place called Ballybricken, which is about 25 minutes outside Limerick City. And that is the home place of the one and only Delores O Riordan. And personally, I'm very, very proud and honoured to live in an area where such a famous and incredible individual comes from.
A unique voice, Dan. A unique voice.
An incredibly unique voice. You can kind of, there's no other voice like Delores O'Riordan's voice.
I agree, Dan. I think in fairness, the Cranberries all in, when you just look at the package that they still present, and they mastered a particular sound, and nobody sounds like the Cranberries, and nobody sounds like Delores O'Riordan.
No, and to people who live in Limerick and are from Limerick, they are they hold a special place in the hearts of people here in Limerick.
Yeah.
It's very much the Cranberries is very much intertwined with the kind of Limerick identity, if there's such a thing.
Sure.
When Limerick win the Hurling All Ireland, which they have twice recently, it's either Sean South of Garryowen or Dreams by the Cranberries people are singing, or when you walk down O'Connell Street here in Limerick, you hear the buskers playing the Cranberries.
And it kind of sounds like Limerick, doesn't it, the Cranberries? They actually sound like Limerick.
Well, Delores O'Riordan certainly sings in her own accent, and everyone here has a story. Whether that's like, I've heard one a fella I know says he gave Noel Hogan driving lessons. My wife is from here originally, and her first ever gig was a Cranberries gig in London. And
Wow.
one of the Cranberries actually gave her father the tickets for free, and they got to go. There's just everyone has a Cranberry story. The closest thing I have to a Cranberry story is that when I first moved here, the first time I visited our local church, I heard this person singing in the church, and immediately I thought to myself, that voice sounds very, very familiar. And it was actually, turns out it was the mother of Delores O'Riordan singing. And I just tell you this, you can tell kind of where Dolores got some of her style from, because hearing her mother singing in the church, she has a very, very good voice and some of the same characteristics as Dolores.
Yeah, and great county, great city. I suppose the Cranberries are to Limerick, and Limerick are to the Cranberries what Liverpool is to the Beatles, what Dublin is to U2. It's that kind of intertwined relationship, isn't it? And these places give birth to these great bands, and then they kind of come synonymous with one another, don't they?
They do. In Limerick at the moment, we have statues to Richard Harris. We have a Terry Wogan statue. We have an Axel Foley statue. I really hope at some point in the future, not too distant future, we have a statue to Delores O'Riordan, because she
Yeah.
certainly deserves to be remembered forever here in Limerick.
Totally, and no, and of course from Limerick, but to the world, because a very American sounding band at times,
Mm.
were one of the bands who defined that sort of alt rock '90s sound, that the grunge pop, alt grunge rock sound of the '90s. That was very much the Cranberry sound, and I know just even from doing this pod, so far of the different fans' reactions you get, the Cranberries fans are incredibly dedicated to the band. They're defensive about the band. They love the band. They have a real connection with the band, don't they, Dan? The fans and the Cranberries, a symbiotic relationship. They love them.
One of the things I note as well, and you've kind of mentioned it there, is that they really are a global band, and the loyalty they
Yeah.
have is incredible. And I have a theory, As to why, well, as to why they're so kind of well liked, they're almost. I don't know whether I'm right in saying this, but sometimes I feel like the Cranberries are almost liked more in countries outside of Ireland.
Yeah.
They're seen as kind of they're given a much greater stature. Like I remember back years ago, I remember traveling to Cuba, and
Mm.
a fella I met over there was a big Cranberries fan, and one of the reasons I think the Cranberries are so popular around the world, well, firstly, I have to say it's Dolores's voice, and
Yeah.
it's
No doubt.
remarkable, and it's sometimes it sounds Irish and from the Irish tradition. Sometimes it almost sounds kind of like Indian music or something. It's just so profoundly uh, strange, but in a really good way. But the other reason I think they're very popular. Abroad in non-English speaking countries is because if you listen to their songwriting style, it often the choruses or even sometimes the verses are very much based around the idea of repetition. So there's very few words in some of the choruses. So it makes it easier for people who have English as a second language to understand and also to remember. And that's one of the theories I have.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Dan, I had the same experience when traveling through Latin American countries.
Mm.
You mentioned Cuba. I had a similar experience in Nicaragua. I was staying in a town called Granada, and beautiful little town that it was. And I was wandering around, the big backpack, sweating as you do, middle of the day, looking for a hostel. And true story, there was bells ringing from a beautiful old colonial church, but coming from a courtyard, there was the sound of the Cranberries album. This one, "To the Faithful Departed," and they were playing that song. That just defines the album for many people, which is "Salvation." Really defines it for me, and it was coming out. And then, after that, I remember hearing "When You're," "Miss You When You're Gone" coming out, and it just brought me in. I stayed in that hostel, but they loved the Cranberries. They had the CDs behind the counter, and they said, "Oh, Ireland, the Cranberries." And is that you two feeling? This is another band that, to use that hard word. It's overused, but use that expression. It is overused, but put Ireland on the map. The Cranberries, in the same way as they're synonymous with Limerick, are synonymous with Ireland. And then when we cast our mind back to almost 25 years ago, the 30th of April 1996, slap bang in the middle of the Britpop period, the Cranberries dropped their third studio album, "To the Faithful Departed," coming on the back of two very, very successful albums. And, didn't it, so let's be honest about it, it didn't quite hit the critical success of "No Need to Argue." It was, of course, a massive, massive success. Number two in the UK, number four in the US, which is its highest ranking in the US, huge all over the world, many times platinum. Um, but in terms of the response from critics, they did not. It was not. It's not necessarily. It wasn't necessarily the best received Cranberries album, Dan, was it?
It wasn't like I'll give you a quote from Kevin Courtney writing in the Irish Times at the time. Okay, he said, "If you can get past the heavy-handed fusion of icy, feckless indie and clumsy, crushing pomp rock, there are still the trite lyrics to deal with. But since the worst of them have already been held up in the cold light of print, I won't add insult to inanity." Now that is a
Wow.
scathing, scathing review, and I think to a great extent it is unfair because there is
Yeah.
some bangers on the album, but I think in fairness there is and I love the album, and I know you love the album, I think, Paul, as well. But there is a few kind of uh lyrics on it that might not be Dolores's best, and in fairness she recognized that. She said that you can't write normal things when you're incredibly famous because you're sitting in a hotel room and you're almost a prisoner in the hotel room and you're watching the news, and that's about all you can write about. And she acknowledged that herself. And there is a few kind of suspect lyrics. So for example, and I like to imagine these in a kind of an Alan Partridge voice. So there's one quote from one of the songs, "I Just Shot John Lennon," and it's, "With a Smith and Wesson 38, John Lennon's life was no longer a debate." And then she goes on, "He had perpetually known that it wouldn't be nice because in 1980 he paid the price." And then, of course, there's the classic lyric, "To all those people, doing lines, don't do it. Inject your
Oh
soul
yeah.
with liberty. It's free.
You,
So I don't know.
yeah, I mean,
What do you think of those lyrics, Paul?
I'm not. I mean, we I'm not there for Dan Courtney's hot take. Of course, the hot take what hadn't been quite invented in 1996, but I don't quite agree with that, Dan, and
Mm,
I'll tell you why. For me, the lyrics on this album are consistently honest
mm,
and they're consistently to the point, and I think that's one of the album's strengths. And I mean, you mentioned some of the lyrics from Salvation. I mean, Salvation is an anti-drug song.
yeah,
It's very hard to imagine a band, a rock band now, making an anti-drug song with those kind of lyrics to all those people doing lines, don't do it, don't do it, inject your soul with liberty, it's free, it's free. I mean, I think what's not to like about that, you know? I mean, I think it's all good, and it's a little bit of its time,
mm,
but there's an honesty there and a direct and like sort of there's a direct. There's a direct use of language, which I quite like, and I think is very, very refreshing. I think that in terms of the John Lennon lyrics, I think some of that there's a slight tongue in cheek here,
yeah,
that runs through some of the songs in the album. A slight use of irony,
mm.
and there's a cleverness in what Dolores is doing at times that I think may have been missed by some of the critics, if I'm frank.
Yeah, well, it definitely, the criticism it received was way too harsh because I mean we'll come to the kind of songs we both like, but
Yeah,
even though I've mentioned kind of lyrics, I'm not crazy about some of the songs that include those lyrics are the songs that I like most on the album. So all in all, when you look at the album as a whole and you look at, as you say, the kind of innocence, the directness, and you kind of weigh it up as a work, I think it's very good. And I think it also has to be remembered that this was coming after two incredibly massive, very, very popular, very, very influential albums. And you know what they say about, in this case it was a difficult third album, but the difficult second album, like if if you're gonna be compared to these incredible albums, it's kind of unfair in a way because if the Cranberries hadn't released those two albums before this, and this was, say, their debut album or even their second album, people might have said, yeah, it's a brilliant album. But because they're comparing it to two that are just absolute classics, that's why it gets talked down a bit, I think.
yeah, it's a very, very good point. I mean, it doesn't quite. It- I mean, remember when it came out. I remember Salvation live on Top of the Pops.
Mm,
It was its first single, um, and the performance is great. It's on YouTube. For me, the Cranberries were at their best as a live band, and some of these songs sound better live than they do on the record. The various versions of Salvation that you'll get live online are really, really good. Um, and you look at that Top of the Pops performance. There's a lot of confidence in it. They're doing all the head banging. Dolores is just such a great charismatic presence. And I remember it landing at the time, and it was a band who came off the back of two very successful albums, and kind of had the world at their feet. But I think they did some really clever things on this album. And on Salvation, the lead single, there's a really great video in it, right? So
yeah.
back in the '90s, of course, then we both remember it well. We were very young, but music videos were huge. Getting play on MTV was massive. And so Salvation had a really, really good video, which I think was the last video that they had that was played on heavy rotation on MTV. The world was changing, the scene was things were moving on. But the video, it's kind of it's both dark and funny
Yeah.
at the same time. So the band are there giving it absolute loads, head banging, doing everything's going on out there. And then you've got a girl on the bed, exorcist like, sort of and then there's a crazy clown jumping around, and then there's these two parents, and the clown ties the parents onto a chair, and there's the lyrics on that song, and to all the parents with sleepless nights, tie your kids home to their beds, clean their heads, So I think there's some very I think Salvation for me is up there and one of the top tracks on the album.
Yeah, I'm glad you said it, Paul, because I picked it for one of my top three as well. Because I just think Dolores's voice in it is brilliant. It's just like that growl she has at times. Like the song is an absolute pop stomper, and I'm delighted you mentioned the video as well because that was something that just jumped out to me. Like it's there's pure 1996 energy off it. Like if you were if you wanted to describe the kind of feeling of 1996 to
Yeah.
people who weren't there, you'd show them that video, because it's kind of like you just wouldn't have a video like that now, because now I think music videos, they're much more minimalistic. There's a lot
Yeah.
less going on. In this video, they literally threw in the kitchen sink. There, one minute, as you say, to someone on the bed, the next minute Dolores is dancing around, and it's all this kind of psychedelic disco-y style stuff around her head, you know. Um,
That's it, and in all the fun and the kind of chaos, there's some really serious things going on because the band are always close to the edge. Do you know the way there's this kind of '90s thing? They did it in a lot of music videos in the '90s, but they'd have like this big ledge, and then you could almost fall off the ledge. I don't know what was going on with that in the '90s, but it was in a lot of music videos. But do you remember that part of the video? Then they're there, and they could fall off the ledge at any time, and I think that speaks to that complex relationship that the band and particularly Dolores had with fame. Because the opening track Hollywood, it really, it's melodic, it's grungy, but you can hear the sort of struggle that the band, and as I said, particularly Dolores, are having with fame.
yeah, you're right about bands in this period being close to the edge, because every time I looked at a U2 video from the period, Bono was always very close to the edge. That was a terrible joke. I do apologize to the listeners. Michael Hogan in this video, of course, you just look at the video again, Paul, and look at him playing the bass. He's laying into the thing with his pleck, and you can hear it in the music. He's just baiting away in it, but it sounds great. And again, very, very, very kind of 90s, but not in a bad way. I don't mean to use that in a bad way. The album was actually produced by a guy called Bruce Fairburn. I think I've pronounced his name right. And he was responsible for producing albums by bands like Aerosmith, AC/DC, and Van Halen. So you can definitely, unlike maybe, this is just 2 years after the death of Kurt Cobain and the grunge
Yeah.
scene and all that. So it's a little bit more polished than that style of music, but you can still hear that kind of music coming through, and kind of the overdriven guitars and the heavy drums. So yeah, it's definitely a 1996 tune, but it's a banger.
Yeah, and for sure, and I mean, you can hear. I mean, loss and death are very, they're prominent themes on the album, and lyrically, and I know that there was criticism of lyrics. I like what Dolores does here with the lyrics on a lot of these songs because I think it reflects where she was at that time, and I know you've said that she was talking about where she was,
Mm,
that position of fame, and you can see her in the hotel rooms writing this stuff out. And you see in that in Hollywood
yeah.
where she goes, this is not Hollywood like I understood. It's not Hollywood like, and then it slips into the chorus, and she says, run away, is there anybody there? Run away, is there anybody there? And again, it's a very clever lyrical device because she's making that direct appeal to the audience. First song in the album, big, loud, alternative, grungy rock sound, and she's saying, is there anybody there? Is there anybody there? I mean, like, what's not to like about that, Dan, You're listening to The Big Album Show with Paul and Dan. Please remember to subscribe, hit like, and remember to follow us on our social media platforms at The Big Album Show. Tell me, Dan, we've referenced two tracks, Hollywood and Salvation, which are the first two tracks on the album. Give me your top three and tell me why, and then I'll do the same.
Yeah, well, so Salvation, we've ticked that one off.
Yeah,
Another one would be When You're Gone, right?
yeah,
Nice, bittersweet love song. It has a kind of a doo-wop style, it
yeah.
starts off with those kind of doo-wop backing vocals from Dolores. It's slow. It's kind of it's this kind of really sad kind of love song, and it would remind. Do you know what it reminded me of? It's the kind of song you'd hear back in the '90s, and again, I don't mean this in a bad way, but played at the end of a kind of an Irish college disco or something. That's the slow dance, but it's really good, and I think Dolores knocks it out of the park here with the vocals. Like I I I don't think like it's a good song, but Dolores's vocals makes it like a great song.
Yeah, very much agree, Dan. It wouldn't quite make my top three, but very nice tune, lovely melody, lovely lyrics. Written, if memory serves, in memory of Delores O Riordan's grandfather.
Mm,
And I know the album was dedicated to him, and also to Denny Cordell, who'd signed the band to Island Records, both who died in
mhm.
1996. And it's quite profound, isn't it? The lyrics in it are they are quite profound. And I think she later talked about how the song and the lyrics took on a different meaning, as the years and the decades evolved. And she's singing about bereavement there, and again, quite intensely. But then there's this kind of doo wop sound in the background, and you've kind of got that too. You've got the light and the shade going on there, Dan, don't you? And it's a very appealing little song.
Yeah, because you can when you don't listen to it that closely, it does just sound like a kind of a simple love song, which is the strength of the song, that Dolores manages to kind of talk about these really dark, difficult issues, in a way that's really accessible to people and
Yeah.
popular.
So Salvation won When You're Gone too, Dan. Is that where you're going?
I don't know. I don't really know whether I'll rank them in order, but they're, they're all
I'm going to rank mine in order, Dan, just so you
oh
know.
yeah,
I
yeah.
insist on it. It's
And
my thing.
right. I'll tell you my third one, right, and then this, and then I'm
Are you
looking
going to go
forward to
left
seeing
field
if
on
this
us here,
what.
Dan? Are you? You're going to go left field on
I'm
us
gonna go.
here.
No, not too left field, but I'll tell you. I remember. I don't remember this at the time when the album was released, but I do remember downloading it a few years later in the early 2000s on a thing called Napster. Do you remember that?
Oh
You
my
used to.
God,
I know. I shouldn't. I
that
shouldn't.
was
The
that
police
was
will be
highly
knocking on the
controversial,
door
wasn't it,
now. Yeah,
Dan?
it was. Yeah, but you used to go on to Napster and you'd search for a song and then you could download it. But you could, like, it wasn't like Spotify. It would take you probably the best part of 2 days to download one song, and you might only manage to download half the song at time. So I downloaded this song anyway because one of my favorite musicians was mentioned in the name of the song, and the song is "I Just Shot John Lennon." Um, and I know I kind of commented on some of the lyrics that I didn't like in it, but at the same time, I think the song itself is an interesting song. Like, it starts with the band. It sounds to me in the song like reminiscent of the Smiths. So you have kind of, it starts off with this jangly guitar piece, and
Yeah.
the bass sound in it as well sounds like the Smiths. And then of course Dolores comes in singing, and it takes a whole different sort of energy altogether. And yeah, I just like the energy of it. It's yeah, I just dig it.
Yeah, I like it too, Dan. I like that kind of punky sound that they have going on in there, and it kind of there's a bit of courage in the band doing a song like that. And I think, as I said earlier, there's a bit of tongue in cheek going on here, and there's a bit of humor in the lyrics, which is no bad thing, you know. Um, lyrically, as we know, I mean, they did come in for a bit of criticism for that, but I think they knew what they were doing.
Yeah, and it reminded me when I was listening to it, right, of, we talked about Sinead O'Connor a few weeks ago. And Sinead O'Connor, when I was listening to some interviews from her, she talked about the day John Lennon died, right? And she said
Hmm.
that to her, in many ways, it was the day that kind of political pop music died. Ironic in that Sinead herself released some incredible political pop music that we discussed in the episode. Listen back if you haven't heard it. But also, Dolores released some incredible kind of political pop music, rock music, like
Yeah,
Zombie off a different album.
zombie.
So it was just something that came to mind that I don't. I think people like Dolores O'Riordan and Sinead O'Connor kind of um, we're kind of like the inheritors of the John Lennon kind of style of using music to kind of communicate a political message in a very popular way.
Definitely, Dan, and you can hear the influence of Lennon on some of the tracks here, and you can see the anti-war messages coming through. I mean, if you cast your minds back to the mid 90s, I mean, the war in Bosnia was a big moment, and a lot of artists got involved and engaged. U2 famously, the Passengers album, and Miss Sarajevo, of course. And you can hear there's a little bit you can hear that in a song that I really like, it called "Free to Decide," where they talk about. It's a very famous and very prominent, of course, Cranberry song. It's my second song on the album.
Oh, great.
Um, One of the lyrics says, "You must have nothing more with your time to do," and she says, "There's a war in Russia and Sarajevo too." I'm not quite sure what war in Russia she's talking about there, but the Bosnian War certainly was raging, and War Child, which is my third track. Sorry, the Bosnian War was finished by this time, but it had raged,
Yeah.
and there's a War Child is a really touching tune, and she said about it, it's written from a child's point of view. It's reminiscent, of course, and you reference Zombie. It's a rebuke of political violence, and yeah, just a really touching, nice pop rock song with nice orchestral sounds in the background. And it really connects. And 25 years on, you can hear the sincerity uh, of Dolores O'Riordan's lyrics, and there's a great sort of she's speaking her truth, and I think it comes across. It's a really refreshing honesty that you don't get from a lot of bands. I mean, very few bands now, rock bands, contemporary rock bands, would have the courage to put a track like War Child down. Um, and it's very very well worth a listen to anyone who hasn't heard it. It's a powerful package of an album. For me, it still packs a punch 25 years on. Um, I would give it a very, very strong rating. We'll come back at the end and give it our rating. Just remember that after this, I mean, the Cranberries, of course, they went on a huge world tour, which they called the Free to Decide World Tour. Massively successful touring band for many, many years after. Produced a lot of great music after this album as well. And we remember them 25 years on. And I think, Dan, we wanted to dedicate the memory of this show. So you might, you might talk about that.
Yeah, we just want to take a moment to remember Dolores O'Riordan herself, because obviously she passed away not too long ago in 2018, I believe. And she really did a lot for Limerick. She did a lot for the whole country and a lot for music in general. And I think it's very fitting that when we're talking about an album like this, that we remember the memory of Dolores O'Riordan.
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. A unique voice, and never will she'll never be forgotten. There's absolutely no doubt, and will live on in these songs forever and ever. And I know that many of these songs are held in the hearts of a massive legion of Cranberries fans all over the world. And I mean, coming to make our conclusion, I'm going to offer this hot take, Dan, if I can, on
Yeah,
the
do.
album, right? And for me, I'm a big fan, like it an awful lot. Would highly recommend it. Really enjoyed listening to it, delving back into it, reminding myself of what's on it. I'm going to give it a very positive 7.5. I'm going to dock some marks for the front cover. They're in these Dolce and Gabbana purple suits, okay, which again is very 1996, but I don't think does much for the overall package of the album. If I'm completely honest, it's a side point, but it's for me, it's a positive listen, and it packs an honest emotional punch. And a lot of the melodies, a lot of that grunge sound that they have, grunge, mixed with alternative rock, mixed with pop, it's very well worth a listen. And I would very happily recommend this album. What about you, Dan?
Yeah, I'd be close enough to agreeing with you there. I would say that if someone asked me, oh, the Cranberries, what album should I listen to, and they hadn't heard the Cranberries before, it wouldn't be the album I'd send them to. I'd send them probably
Yeah.
to one of the first two albums. Um, but saying that, as we discussed, there's some very very good songs on it. It's a very very enjoyable listen. It deals with complex emotions, but also manages to have some, pop rock bangers on it as well. So I definitely recommend people listen to it if they haven't heard it. Um, so I think I'm going to give it a 6.5. And not because I think 6.5 is a very respectable mark. And the only reason I'm not giving it a higher mark is because, as I say, I love the Cranberries. I like some of their other work a little bit more, And if I was suggesting the band to someone listening to the band for the first time, I wouldn't suggest they start here, but I definitely would tell them to listen to it after they've listened to the first two.
And they may not start there, but it's still a great place to listen. So, To the Faithful Departed, almost 25 years old, released the 30th of April 1996. Uh, we recommend it. Have a listen to it. Make sure if you like this podcast, please, please, please share it. Share with anyone who you think might be interested in. We'd really, really appreciate it. At the Big Album Show, you'll find us on our social media, and please like and subscribe from wherever you get your
And Paul,
podcasts.
it's brilliant to have the support that we've been getting because, as you know yourself, we managed to climb the charts to number 2 in the Irish Music Commentary podcasts. So there's only one place to go now, and that place is to number 1. So with everyone's support, by subscribing and listening and sharing, we will get there. And it's exciting because next week or in 2 weeks' time, we're doing a very interesting album that we both have a lot of love for, Paul. What is it?
Everton Must Go by the Manic Street Preachers.
Yes. Yes. This
Yes.
is going to bring back memories and all sorts. It's a quality album, and I cannot wait to discuss it with you, man.
Absolutely. Cannot wait for that, Dan. And please, we'd say to everyone listening to this, please let us know what you think. You can just get us on social media on Twitter at The Big Album Show. Same thing on Facebook. We'd love to hear from you. Same thing on Instagram. We really would. And thanks to everyone who gets in touch with the show and for all your support.
You're listening to The Big Album Show with Paul Dillon and Dan O'Neill.